Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a picture of St Ives, which has the most wonderful blue water. And it's very easy because it's just a few rectangles for the boats and triangles for the sails. I've mixed a warm blue by adding a couple of colours to French ultramarine, which I'll put in the description. And I'm going round the hills and then filling in the top a bit more, leaving the bottom a little bit empty. Just mixing up some more paint. I like to mix it up as I go, and then you get slightly different colours. So going in from the top again, because the sea is so bright, it's going to knock the sky back and make it very pale. So I need to make the sky quite bold to start with. Moving across to the hill, I've just put in a weak wash of yellow ochre with a tiny bit of green in it, and I'm dropping stronger wet paint into the top of the hill, which will find its way down and make it look more natural. And the cliffs come up quite high, they come up to about there. So the next area is quite dark. It's as though the storms have taken a bite out of the hillside. So I'm just going to put some grey on next to the green, just to show the beginning of it. And there's also grey at sea level. Then I've mixed up a dark brown using burnt sienna and French ultramarine, just to put it in gently. And it's got quite a few nooks and crannies, so I'm just going to try and show those. It's some distance, so they won't show that well. Now I can't do the next hillside because it'll bleed into it, so I'm just going to do the skyline, which is further away. So the way you make things look further away is to add a little blue. So I've got some sky blue left. This isn't the moment to clean your palette early. And I'm just going to put the skyline in, just very gently touching it up to that line. And it's all uneven, because I think some of it is rock and some is foliage. There's a lot of cliff that comes down, so I'm just going to use the homemade grey and separate the cliff, quite a deep cliff. And I'm just going to drop some more grey in there, and then I can come back and make it more defined. I'm doing up and down strokes. And then further round, it's more of a reddy cliff. So I've got the raw sienna and burnt umber. Put that in. And then on top, it's more of an olivey green. So I'm just going to mix up the raw sienna and the sap green and just take it up to my line, nothing more. And then that changes by the lighthouse to more of this colour. So I'll just use some more yellow ochre, and it's quite a V beside the lighthouse where it changes colour. So put that in. Moving across to the lighthouse, and I'm going to do the very darks first. So I'm just adding a little bit more indigo to the mix, and it's got a point that sticks up and then lots of jagged rock. So I'm just putting in the basic shape, making a few little lines. It's so far away, there isn't a lot you can do except change the colour. And then there seems to be a tide mark. And then at the front, it's light at the bottom and dark at the top. So I'm just going to change the colour to the homemade grey because it is a bit lighter. I'll tint it when it's dry, but I'll make a start. And then the other side almost looks like it's got something trying to grow there. It's slightly warmer than the grey. So I'm just going to get tiny bit of green on the brush and just drop it in from the top and then bleed it out. Now the cliff behind the lighthouse is white, so I want to make it dark behind it so that it shows up. So I'm going from both sides, just making it dark. Then I'll bleed that out. St Ives is known for its very beautiful white sand, and I've decided that I'm going to use Naples yellow, and it only goes down to the boats and then it changes to the colour of the water. So just going across, letting it skip in places, because I will tint it, because the sand isn't one colour all over. There's always dark areas and light areas, but by putting the foreground on, you can see that the background's instantly subdued because they aren't such bright colours. Now I've got a stream running down, so I'm just going to put the sand on, but don't worry about gaps. So to allow room for the stream, I'm going to make the paint solid about here. So I'm going back again, just making sure that I've covered all the white paper at this stage. Now, the water that's sitting on top of the sand is quite purpley, so I'm going to use cobalt violet and a little bit of cerulean blue. Just mix them together to get a nice gentle colour. I've also got reflections of the boats a little bit, but I'm just going to drop some in just to show that it is slightly wet. My next step is to put the hillsides in so I can establish the sea level. And it's always a good thing to do to not start in a place that's going to be looked at most. So I'll start on the edge here, just flick in some homemade grey and then some of the darker brown. And the cliffs are very eroded, as though the rainwater's gone down to the sea. So just putting some lines in. And as I put the grey in first, it wet the paper, and then the brown going in, some of it's bled, some of it hasn't, which gives a more random effect. I'm just moving along, darkening any areas now just to help show the waterline, and that also makes the lighthouse stand out a lot more with it being a darker recess. I'm just continuing to work my way along the cliffs, just putting in anything that's in the sun or in the shade just to show the variations, and that will all help the sea look better. The farming that's taking place on top of the hills and any areas that are catching the sun just can be shown in different colour greens and yellows just to harmonise. And then returning to the front of the cliff, which looks like somebody's taken a bite out of, putting dark lines in from the centre and working them out to all the jagged points to make it look more of a cave. Finally adding warm highlights with Indian yellow and yellow ochre to the top. If you haven't got Indian yellow, you could just add a little bit of orange to yellow just to warm it up. I'm now thinking about the sails, and I'm going to put a wet line around the triangular sail, which sort of acts as a stop. I'm not worried about the boats so much, but it's just, you need a clean route around the triangle. So that's just wet the paper slightly. Now this is size 8, it's going to be too big, so I'll go back to the size 5 and just dab it off a bit. Put the paint in, it's got to be done horizontally. Just going across very gently. Starting at the back and moving forward with French ultramarine, I'm using a number 3 brush to go round the boats. You could use latex, but I find it difficult to get exact points. Something with points like a sail is to change the aspect of the brush. You don't try and do the brush as a curve. Take the brush off, move your hand and start from a different position. Just try and do all the strokes sideways because it'll give the sea a better appearance, but you do have to go up and down near the sail. Then returning to the back of the picture, I'm just putting a dark line in by the cliffs by adding a little bit of green and just bringing some of the paint forward just to make it a little bit darker, and because it's being done more quickly as I'm not stopping to go around the sails, I could just give a more finished effect. I'm now moving forward while it's still damp with a warmer colour, the turquoise, which I'm adding a little bit of green to, and then where the colours touch I'll just merge them in, try not to give a violent change. Varying the water from left to right and right to left, so I'm painting from alternate sides just to make sure that I've got a reasonable finish. It does take several applications to cover the white paper fully, but it's just worth being patient and you'll get a better result. So moving forward, I'm now adding the much lighter colour, which is the shallow water coming up to the beach. And there will be sand showing through it, so it just has to be done with delicate light blues and a hint of purple. And then it will all look in harmony when the sand and the boats are finished. And again, going from the right and the left alternately to give an even finish, trying to keep everything the same tone and going round the boats very carefully. These are very straightforward boats. They haven't got too many nooks and crannies and ropes and things. So you just try and draw a rectangle and then take angles off of it. So you take a chunk out for the front, check whether the back's facing forwards or backwards, etc. The same paint that I made up earlier, and just going across and making it a little bit stronger to show up the white boats and white sails. Side to side movements, and I'm using the flat brush because in this particular instance the sea's very calm and it just gives a nice finish. Back to the blue water behind with the same colour but stronger paint, and the sideways movements again just to cover the water. I'm just going around the hillside putting on a few little nooks and crannies. By working on the land and the sea at the same time, the picture develops and the tones are in harmony. Now going across, the middle is quite dark, so I'm going to use some sap green and indigo just to put in a change in crops in the fields. Just doing a little line and then I move that with water. There's a few houses dotted up there, but I'm more interested in the bay. So I'm now just going to use water and just lose the line slightly so it's not so obvious. Subtle change, and with the area that goes down there. And I've got a very light area of cliff and I want it to bounce forward, so I'm going to use a little bit of raw sienna. Just put that there. Nice contrast against the blue. And then it's quite dark behind the lighthouse, so I'm going to change brushes so that I don't accidentally knock the top of the lighthouse off. And this lighthouse is actually octagonal, and it's got a smaller top, so I'm just going to do a triangle on top and then move the grass around it. Anything you can put dark behind something like this will bring it forward nicely. So I'm going to get the dark mix with a little bit of indigo in and just go round the island and the other side. Now I've made that indigo because this is brown and it's nearer and it shows more. Now the next step is to just put a little bit more interest on the hillside, so I'm going to use some Indian red with the green and just put a few different colours in there, and then use the water again just to merge them so it looks more varied, but I'm not actually revealing much. And then there's a brighter area halfway down and a little bit of the brown. Just go over it and then get some dark green, mix it with the lighter green I've already used to give variety. And just drop it in there with the contours of the cliff. And there's one area that stands out as quite yellow, so I'm going to use Indian yellow. If you haven't got Indian yellow, just use anything that's bright. Mix a bit of yellow with some orange. And then I need a ragged edge. So a little bit more indigo and green mixed together. And just drop them in. And I'm coming forward to the water. What I want on the water is, sometimes people call them cat's paws. It's where there's a pattern on the water where the wind's picking up and just moving the water so it looks like little waves. So I'm going to use a number 3 brush and some French ultramarine and a little bit of Prussian blue, and finally a little bit of Viridian. And get them on the brush. I just gently go side to side, leaving gaps between them, not completely covering the water. And go back again with just the Prussian blue and a little bit of indigo in it. And just put the odd dark line in. And back to the first mix. Just do this all the way across, and it just breaks up the surface and makes it look different to the sky. And just with a clear brush, just move some of them around so that you haven't got every single one showing, there's just some showing. Then over where they're further away, I'm just using the French ultramarine. And I just use some clear water on the brush and just move some of those around a little bit. That's just broken it up nicely further away. I'm just going to do a little bit more here. And looking at my sketch, there was a darker streak there. Just breaks it up if there's a darker streak. It's just the way the currents are going. And then a tiny bit more before a colour change. I want to go up to the boat. I want the boat to be fairly crisp in the water patterns so it stands out. Now the turquoise water has got little dabs of green on, so I'm just going to mix some Viridian and some indigo together just to make it a fraction darker. Dab off the brush so I haven't got too much on. And then just do the same again. And this time I'm going to swap to a rigger. Wet it first, get the paint in, because it's slightly nearer. I need to be giving a different effect. Just breaks up the water a little bit. You don't need to do every little facet of the water, but it just all helps. And then coming forward again, it's more cerulean blue. If you go to the sea on a windy day, you'll notice all these marks. Just like that, just livens it up. And then coming forward, they get lighter and lighter. So I'm going to change to cobalt violet and mix that with a cerulean blue. And just put a few little marks in, just again to break it up. You have to keep changing the colours to make the picture interesting. And then as it gets nearer, they get smaller and smaller. So I'm just going to put a few little dots in every now and again, and then I'll join them together, just merging them with the water. Get a bigger brush with just water on it and just merge them slightly and soften them. I'll do the same again. So now a little bit more cobalt violet. I'll let it down a bit more because I don't really want it to be dominant at the front. And then it goes green again. So I've got some green here. I'll just put in a line of green, but very pale. And then use the water again just to soften that, so it's not dominant. And then finally, with a bigger brush, just some light blue right to the edge. So I use the cerulean blue, let it down. Lose the edge around the boats. While it's drying, I can put the light on the lighthouse, but because of the time of day, it's actually looking quite dark. So I'm going to use Payne's grey for a change, because I haven't got Payne's grey in that area, and just put in the glass that's looking dark, and that is actually just above the area that's dark. Now coming forward, I can put some raw and burnt sienna, probably just raw, on the beach, just where there's slightly different change in colour. Use some water to lose the edges, and I will add a little bit burnt sienna to it just to soften it a bit. Sometimes take a puddle and then take the paint out the puddle, and it gives you a different colour. Sand is not all orange, it's often biscuit coloured. This makes it look darker towards the front. It's a good contrast. And a dark bit on the end, and then you're drawn to the middle. The water that's on the sand is slightly blue and slightly purple, so I'm going to use a tiny bit of French ultramarine and just see what it looks like. Let's move it around a little. And then get a flat brush that's clean, just dry it off a bit and just lose the edges. Less is more sometimes. Now that it's dried, I can get a very small brush and put a suggestion of people in the boats. So they've got orangey buoyancy aids on, but I don't want it to mix with the sand too much, so I'm using red. I'm just going to add a little bit of Indian yellow. I'll just put the suggestion of somebody with a life jacket on or a buoyancy aid. There's 2 of them in that boat and 2 in here. And then there's a little bit of sea between the sails, but first of all I'm just going to put some dark in to suggest a head. And the same here, although sometimes when they're sailing that their body can be different side of the boat to the head. And then I want to suggest a tiny bit of a hull, and it's going from left to right. And it's a different design going on its side slightly, and then the one coming the other way is white, but I've got a little bit of sea to put round the sails, so I'm just mixing up with a fresh brush some sea colour, a bit of blue and green together, and then coming round the man, slightest flick just to get rid of the white paper, and then there's shadow under the boat, and on this side I've got a little bit of blue to go between them as well. And on this one there's a line underneath the sail. And with the wind on the sea, there isn't really any major reflection. I've just got a tiny reflection here. So what I'll do is just put a bit of dark around it. just to suggest it. Now the boat's on the beach. One's got a red top. Any red will do from your paint box. Just follow the line of the hull. And then it's got a black screen, which I'm going to add a little bit of blue to Payne's Grey, just to give it a lift, because the whole picture is quite blue. And there's some sun reflecting on it. It's a little bit curved. And then there's a shadow underneath of the sand, which I'll come back to in a moment. But the next boat is turquoise. So I'll just mix up some turquoise and pop it in. There's a shadow at the front to go in afterwards. I'll make it a little bit darker to show that it's nearer, and just add a little bit of cerulean blue to separate it from the sea. Now the one with the red top has got a shadow underneath, so I'm just going to go back with a flat brush. Just take the paint back a fraction to allow for putting in the shadow. I'm almost making a shadow by moving the paint. It's got an outboard on the back that's mostly black, and that's resting on the sand. And this one isn't so apparent. So the next step is to bring the sand up to the bottom of the boat. And then add reflections. And the same with this one. Just bring it up. And then when it's dry in a moment, I can just add some reflections. I've just gone round and tidied up the boats a little bit, putting on the outboard motors and any shadows underneath. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and you'll get to St Ives yourself quite soon. The St Ives blue is very special. Thank you very much for watching.